you know, if I'm out somewhere remote, I'm not sure I want to be super worried about constantly recharging batteries. So again, like all of these have advantages and disadvantages here. Just go ahead.
I just wanted, you said mirrorless. Could you just describe what that means?
Yeah, so these SLR, it's called a single lens reflex is what it is. And you can hear that there's actually a mirror inside. Like that's what's happening when the shutter clicks. There's a mirror that's coming up and then slapping down, and it's loud. I mean, most people have been to a wedding and probably been totally irritated by the photographer constantly doing this, but it's that mirror slap. So these mirrorless cameras are different, and they have what's called a leaf shutter, so it doesn't have this mirror that slaps, and it's significantly quieter, right? I mean, there's still a noise there, and I could probably even make it quiet. Some of the new SLRs actually have a quiet, it's still, I mean, come on, it's, I'm like, why'd you even put that on there? Like, I can't even tell the difference, really. It's maybe dampened a little, but, so between mirrorless and, you know, these SLR camera systems, you know, weight, like all of that comes into, like losing the mirror, it also slows your camera down. This is a significantly slower camera. You know, if you told me I'm in college and I desperately want to be a sports photographer, I'm not going to tell you to buy this camera. I'm going to tell you to buy this camera. You know, if you said, and again, like, well, a little bit more, we'll talk about it, travel. I will say, like, travel, you know, as a foreigner, if I put this in your face, it's a little more intimidating than if I put this in your face. I mean, that's kind of something to think about. But again, slower. I mean, because you asked, we'll talk about it a little bit more. Battery life on these is awful. They drain really quickly. So it's something that, you know, I would definitely, and we're going to go into this, I would have multiple batteries if I ever took this traveling. Way more than I would necessarily need for the SLR. You know, film, of course, has its, you know, own things as far as travel and precautions you need to take as far as x-rays and things like that. And then, again, you know, you've got your smartphone, somebody specifically, like light, again, like ability to take photos in the dark. Your smartphone, you know, not going to work. Like, again, depending on your trip, a smartphone is not going to be the best choice. But if you know you're going to be out during the day and, you know, the light's going to be great most of the time, your smartphone takes amazing photos. You know, and you have the ease of size and weight and all of that. But we'll keep talking about that. All of these, before I would ever travel again, I would definitely make sure you have extra batteries. Make sure you have your battery charger. You know, just because you're going somewhere that might have these things, they're going to be 3 times as expensive, of course, wherever you are. So putting in the cost up front and making sure you have them is absolutely a good choice. Memory cards too. Memory cards are so cheap these days. I would definitely buy up memory cards. There's different schools of thought. Memory cards are so huge now. You know, some people are like, I'm just going to buy 164, you know, gig memory card and keep it in my camera for the whole trip. And what happens when that memory card falls in the lake or it's corrupt? Now your whole trip is gone. So, you know, it's kind of how you want to play it. You know, the other choice is if you're constantly pulling out smaller cards, you know, then they fall in the lake or they get lost or whatever. I'm kind of a fan of having a couple of smaller cards just in case something happens to one of them. Either the card is corrupt or it gets lost. You know, you haven't lost your entire trip. I will say too, on very few things am I a stickler about like name brand, buy good memory cards. I've never had a name brand memory card fail on me. SanDisk and Lexar are the 2 like big ones. They are a little bit more. I mean, you're going to see a price difference, but I think it's totally worth it. Water protection, definitely depending on where you're going. They sell like fancy bags that go, around your camera. A plastic grocery bag works great too. Just cut out a hole for your lens and hold it, and I can still access all, little Ziploc bag. Most, that's another difference between a lot of these cameras. Like, this camera is very well weather sealed. I'll shoot with it in the rain, maybe not, in a hurricane or something, but in a pretty decent downpour, I'm still pretty confident that this camera is going to be okay. This camera is not weather sealed. If it was raining and I was outside, I would start to get nervous that, water's seeping in all these little places and I could be causing myself big trouble. So I'm going to be a lot more cautious with that one. So again, like, you don't have to buy any sort of fancy bags or anything, but as you're, heading out for the day, it's so easy to just put like put a gallon Ziploc bag in. And then if it starts to rain, you don't have to stop shooting. Lens cleaning cloths and other things, you should attempt to take care of the lenses on your camera. Definitely makes it a little nicer. If you have if you wear glasses, any sort of like glass cleaning cloth or anything is gonna work just fine. Optional things, tripod. Those of you that want to shoot at night and maybe your camera gear isn't the greatest, your tripod is your new best friend. Because if you can put it on a tripod, you can keep that shutter open longer, and we're going to talk about that, and you can get the image that you want. We'll talk about that. But tripod is something that I would probably have if I was traveling. Now, there are rules. If you go into certain like churches and other establishments like that, you cannot bring in a tripod. So that's something to think about. Like cave tours, whatever. Usually, and again, like that's a dark place, but usually they don't allow any sort of tripods. So keep that in mind, and that's something you can be Googling, as you're like kind of doing your pre-trip planning. Filters, I'm not going to talk about too much. A remote is always fun. Again, like those, you want that image on your tripod. You want everything to be as still as possible. A remote's really nice for that. Remotes can be really nice for, hey, I was here too. So a remote is also a pretty decent thing to have. So now we're going to get into like the super nitty-gritty. It sounds like just about everyone is shooting on some sort of, predetermined, my camera's in an automatic mode, whether or not it's Nikon, Canon, whatever, it's in some sort of automatic mode. Your camera is making all the decisions for you. And that's 100% why your images don't look the way you want them to look, because your camera's making all the decisions. So we're going to start to learn these terms, and then you guys are going to start to make all the decisions, and you're probably notice that your photography gets even worse. And then you're going to notice, hey, this looks like what I want it to look like. So shutter speed. Well, actually, okay, exposure is the big one. You've got overexposed images, too much light, everything's washed out. Then you've got underexposed images, everything is dark and muddy and you can't see. So exposure is really important. You want to have a properly exposed image. You want to have true blacks. You want to have whites. Exposure is controlled by these three things. It's controlled by shutter speed, it's controlled by aperture, and it's controlled by your ISO. And we're going to talk about all of them a lot. So shutter speed is literally that click. It's literally how long is that mirror staying up. So shutter speed is, it's described, it's in seconds. A slow shutter speed, I'm going to try and like really make it slow. I'll make it even slower. So this is like 1 second. Okay, slow shutter speed. Woo, a little overexposed. All the way to like that's like 3200. And usually you're gonna end up somewhere in the middle, 250, 125 are all like pretty popular.
So the number is 1 over like 150 seconds, or when you say 150 or?
Yes, so it would be like 500th of a second or 3200th of a second, all the way to like 1 second, 2 seconds. So shutter speed. Probably on just about everybody's camera you have a mode where it's shutter priority. I don't use that one very often, but again, let's go back to like the sporting. The sports model. In sports, shutter speed, anytime you have like a moving object, shutter speed comes into play big time. And again, like you're making an artistic choice. You know, do I want that moving object frozen? Or do I want that moving object like to have motion and, you know, flow? Think about like a dancer or something. You know, do I want her like stopped in the air, you know, frozen leaping, or do I want to like see her dress and see, you know, everything flowing? So this is a really good example of shutter speed. I think this is Mia Hamm. Just from what I've said so far, slow or fast shutter speed? Slow. It's slow. You know, how do I know that? You know, raindrops, like I can't really see them very well when I go outside, and these are frozen and streaky. You know, her leg as she's kicking the ball, it's not crisp and clear. You know, her leg has a little bit of motion. I would probably say this was shot at like that 30th of a second, which is a pretty slow shutter speed. Typically, I would say, you know, most people can't, and it depends on like how heavy, you know, how strong you are, how you hold the camera, the length of, you know, the length of your lens and those kinds of things. But typically I wouldn't try and hand hold a camera at less than about a 30th if I want things to be, you know, assuming I'm trying to make everything nice and in focus, I'm not going to hand hold it less than a 30th because everything's going to be blurry. So I'm going to say, you know, she made a choice. I want this artistic black and white image. I want to see movement. So that's about a 30th. Now on this next one, she kind of made a different choice. She said, you know, here's Mia flying through the air, and I want her, you know, I want to see her. I want to see her face. I want to see the ball. Again, if you look closely, like at her hands and other things, there's still a little bit of motion there. It's not like tack sharp frozen. You know, a moving cyclist or a moving, you know, a runner, you're probably not gonna, you're gonna want like maybe that 1/250th of a second. I think this is probably a little bit slower because again, like she's not super frozen here, but this is probably around that like 125, 250th. And then we're gonna go to the next super extreme, and here's a bird like totally frozen in flight. This is your 4,000th of a second. This is, you know, I'm making a choice here. I want that bird frozen. You know, if I photograph this bird at a 30th, all I'm gonna see is whooshing feathers. You know, I'm not gonna be able to see this kind of detail. So that's shutter speed. Now, again, I said all these things work together. So again, as you're watching your soccer match or you're doing whatever, and shutter speed becomes your most important thing because I really, really, really want blur. So basically you're gonna choose an aperture and you're gonna choose an ISO that supports wanting that shutter speed of a 30th. And then we're gonna get into these other things too. So that would be like a shutter priority type mode. Now let's talk a little bit about aperture. Aperture has to do with your lens. And all of these things have to do with light. I mean, light is key. So shutter speed, again, like how much light is it letting in? At a 30th, it's letting in a lot more light than it's letting in at a 4,000. So now we're on to aperture. Aperture is described in f-stops, if you've ever heard anybody use that term. There's like, and I love these old film lenses because it's all mechanical and I can kind of show it to you. But you have your old camera, and this is my aperture ring, and this lens just happens to go from an aperture of 2 to an aperture of 22. This is 2. 2 is the widest aperture. Okay, so 2 is gonna let in a lot of light. Okay, and then what happens is I start to stop down, is my hole's getting smaller. So now we're at F22, and it's a very small little opening, and I'm letting in a lot less light. So F22 all the way up to all the way wide. Can you guys see that? And you know, at F2. Okay, so aperture, again, it's controlling how much light is coming in, and aperture is probably my most favorite. So aperture is controlling something called depth of field.